A little girl walks into school. She pauses at the classroom door and looks around. Every seat is occupied. But something feels strange, because even though there are empty spaces beside other children, no one is sitting in them. And slowly, painfully, she realizes why. Those seats are being avoided because of her face, her skin, her hair. Every morning she walks into that room carrying the same quiet hope. Maybe today will be different. Maybe today someone will smile. Maybe today someone will sit beside her. But day after day, nobody does. So she sits alone, again. And as the other children laugh together, whisper together, grow up together, she learns something most children should never have to learn, that sometimes you can be surrounded by people and still feel completely invisible. Now here's the part that makes this story almost impossible to believe. That same little girl, the child nobody wanted to sit beside, would one day stand on one of the greatest stages in the entire world. And thousands of people would rise to their feet, not because they pitied her, not because they felt sorry for her, but because her voice moved them so deeply, they could not stop crying. So the question is, what happened between those two moments? How does a child a country tried to reject become a woman the world refuses to forget? This is the story of Insooni. And before this story ends, you are going to understand why millions of people in Korea hear her voice and feel something break inside them. April 5th, 1957. In a small town called Pocheon, South Korea, a baby girl is born. Her mother is Korean. Her father is a Black American soldier stationed in Korea after the Korean War. Her name is Kim In-soon. But one day, the world would know her by another name, Insooni. Now to understand her story, you have to understand the Korea she was born into. Because this is not the modern Korea people know today. This is not the Korea of K-pop and Netflix dramas and global fame. This is a country still bleeding from war. Entire cities destroyed, families shattered, poverty everywhere. And in the middle of all that chaos, Korea held tightly to one idea: sameness. One people, one culture, one identity. And then there was Insooni, a little girl with darker skin and curly hair walking through streets where everybody else looked different from her. She stood out instantly. And in that society, standing out was dangerous, because to many people, children like her were not simply different. They were reminders of foreign soldiers, of war, of relationships people did not want to talk about, of a painful history Korea wanted desperately to move beyond. And children always feel what adults refuse to say out loud, even before anybody explains it to them. They feel it in the stares, the whispers, the silence. And very early in life, Insooni realized something heartbreaking. The world had already made a decision about her before she was even old enough to understand herself. School quickly became the place where she felt it the most. Children stared at her constantly, not curious stares, not friendly ones, the kind of stare that makes you feel like you should not be there. Some whispered behind their hands, some laughed openly, and others decided to give her a name, Twiggy, a Korean slang term for mixed-race children. But there was no kindness in that word, no warmth. It was not meant to describe her, it was meant to reduce her, to remind her that she was not fully Korean, that she belonged somewhere in between. And in that world, in between meant nowhere. Think about what that does to a child, not a grown adult, a little girl, a child who wakes up every morning knowing exactly what waits for her outside the door. The whispers, the laughter, the isolation. Even teachers looked past her. She would raise her hand in class and be ignored, like her voice did not matter, like she did not matter. So eventually, she stopped trying. And every afternoon she walked home alone, watching other children run together, laugh together, belong together, while she walked by herself day after day, year after year. And the most painful part, her father was gone, back in America, which meant the one person who could have stood beside her and said, "That is my daughter, you will respect her," was not there. So her mother carried everything alone, and her mother fought hard, harder than most people will ever understand. She worked constantly just to survive, just to keep food on the table, just to keep the lights on. But no matter how hard she worked, she could not protect her daughter from the world outside that door. And slowly, a dangerous voice began forming inside Insooni's mind. A quiet voice, one that whispered, "Maybe they are right about me." That is what constant rejection does to a child. It changes the way they see themselves. It creates wounds nobody else can see. But here is the incredible thing about Insooni. Even during her darkest years, that voice inside her never fully won. Because underneath all the pain, there was something else growing too. Something powerful. Something nobody around her understood yet. Her voice. Not her speaking voice, her singing voice. And that voice would eventually do something nobody thought was possible. It would force an entire country to finally see her. But before that happened, life was about to test her even more. And what happened next would change everything. If this story is touching you already, take 1 second and hit the like button. Not for the algorithm, but because stories like this deserve to be remembered. And trust me, the most emotional part of Insooni's story is still ahead. When Insooni was around 12 years old, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from America, from her father. Now stop for a second and imagine what that meant to her. A little girl who had spent years feeling abandoned, now holding proof that somewhere across the ocean, her father remembered her name. Those letters became precious to her. She read them again and again, because for the first time in her life she felt acknowledged by him, seen by him. And then one day, her father made her an offer. Come to America, leave Korea behind, leave the loneliness behind, start over somewhere new. A place where she would not immediately stand out every time she walked into a room. Most people would have said yes instantly. Most adults would. But Insooni did something remarkable. She said no, not because she was not tempted, not because she was not tired, but because of her mother, the woman who stayed when everyone else left, the woman who struggled every single day just to keep them alive. At 12 years old, Insooni understood something many adults never do. That love is not proven when life is easy. It is proven when leaving would be easier. So she stayed. And slowly, the letters stopped coming. The connection faded. And another door in her life quietly closed. But around that same time, someone else entered her story. An American soldier named Ronald Lewis. Ronald Lewis understood something immediately when he looked at Insooni. He understood what it feels like to be judged before people even know your name. Because as a black man growing up in America, he had experienced that pain himself. So when he saw a lonely mixed-race girl being treated like an outsider in Korea, he could not ignore it. Ronald Lewis and other soldiers began looking after her. They bought her food, bought her clothes, made her laugh, talked to her like she mattered. And for the first time in a very long time, Insooni felt normal. Not strange, not unwanted, not different, just human. Can you imagine how powerful that must have felt for her? To finally be around people who looked at her face and saw no problem at all. But just as she began feeling safe, life took it away again. In 1973, Ronald Lewis returned to America, and once again, someone who made her feel seen disappeared from her life. By now, Insooni was entering her teenage years. No diploma, no clear future, no connections, no father, and a society that still treated her like she did not belong. But she still had one thing: one thing nobody could take from her: her voice. And that voice was becoming impossible to ignore. If you are still watching right now, comment the word resilience below, because everything about this woman's life proves one thing: sometimes the people the world tries hardest to break become the strongest people in it. There are some people whose talent is so powerful, the moment they reveal it, everything changes. That was Insooni. Her voice was not just beautiful, it carried pain, loneliness, strength. Every note sounded like someone turning suffering into music, and when people heard her sing, they felt something immediately, even if they could not explain it. At first, she sang anywhere she could. Small venues, tiny performances, any place willing to give her a microphone. Because survival depended on it, she and her mother needed money, and singing was the only thing the world could not take away from her. Then one day, a woman named Han Baek-hee heard her voice, and everything changed. Han Baek-hee was already respected in the Korean music industry. She knew talent when she heard it. But what she heard in Insooni was more than talent. It was truth, raw emotion, something real, something impossible to fake. So she took a risk, a huge one. Because Korea at that time was still uncomfortable with someone who looked like Insooni becoming a public figure. But Han Baek-hee believed in her anyway. And in 1978, at 21 years old, Insooni officially debuted as part of a girl group called the Hee Sisters. Now understand what that moment meant: a mixed-race Black Korean woman standing on stage in front of the entire country, in a society that had spent years trying to make her feel invisible. Just her presence alone was powerful. And then she sang. The room changed instantly. People who came out of curiosity stayed because of the voice, and slowly, the same country that once rejected her began listening to her music. By the early 1980s, Insooni was becoming a star. Her songs climbed the charts. Her voice filled homes across Korea. The little girl nobody wanted to sit beside was now becoming one of the most recognizable voices in the country. But success does not erase pain, and it does not guarantee safety. Because just when it seemed like her life was finally stabilizing, everything began falling apart again. The Korean music industry was changing. New stars were rising. New trends were taking over, and slowly, attention began shifting away from her. Then came the moment that nearly destroyed her. Han Baek-hee, the mentor who believed in her from the beginning, looked at her and said something she would never forget. "You lose, she rises." Just like that. Replaced. Discarded. And those words hit harder than the insults from childhood ever did. Because betrayal from strangers hurts. But betrayal from someone you trust, that cuts deeper. For a while, Insooni disappeared emotionally. The confidence faded. The old wounds returned, and once again, she found herself asking the same painful question she had asked as a little girl. Do I really belong here? But what nobody realized was this: Insooni had already survived worse than failure. Much worse. And people who survive that kind of pain do not stay down forever. If this story is hitting you emotionally, subscribe to the Story Haven Hub right now, because stories like this remind us that some people do not become strong because life was kind to them. They become strong because life gave them no other choice. In 1987, Insooni released one of the most personal songs of her career, Beetle on a Vinyl Floor. Now, to most people, that title sounds strange, until you understand the meaning behind it. In Korean homes at the time, yellow vinyl floors were everywhere. Bright yellow, warm, common, and in the song, Insooni describes a single black beetle crawling across that floor. Visible, out of place, impossible not to notice. The metaphor was painfully clear. She was the beetle, a dark figure moving through a society that constantly reminded her she did not match the world around her. And for the first time, she stopped hiding that pain. She sang it openly, honestly, and people felt it deeply. Because behind the fame, behind the success, there was still a wounded little girl trying to understand where she belonged. But as the years passed, the industry moved on. New stars appeared, new music trends exploded, and slowly, Insooni faded from the spotlight. Not completely, but enough to feel forgotten again. And for many artists, that would have been the end. But not for her. Because in 2011, everything changed. She appeared on a television show called I Am a Singer. Now, this was not a beginner talent show. This was a brutal stage where experienced artists performed live in front of audiences with nowhere to hide, no auto-tune, no editing, just raw ability. And out of every song she could have chosen, Insooni chose a song called Father. A song about absence, about longing, about the man who left before she truly knew him. And the moment she began singing, the entire atmosphere changed. People stopped breathing. The audience cried openly. Judges sat in silence. Because this did not feel like performance anymore. It felt like someone opening the deepest wound of their life in front of millions of people. And suddenly, Korea saw her differently. Not just as a singer, but as a human being. A woman who had carried rejection, loneliness, abandonment, and pain her entire life, and somehow transformed all of it into music. Then something unbelievable happened. Ronald Lewis, the American soldier who once helped her as a lonely teenager, saw her performing during a U.S. tour. After nearly 40 years apart, they reunited. Think about that moment. A man who once saw value in an invisible little girl, now seeing her become a woman admired around the world. It is almost too perfect to sound real. And then came Carnegie Hall, New York City, one of the most legendary stages on earth, the stage where the greatest performers in history stood. And Insooni stood there too, the same little girl who once sat alone in school, now receiving standing ovations from thousands of people. The world finally saw her. Completely. But the most beautiful part of her story came afterward. Because instead of only enjoying success, Insooni looked back at the pain she experienced growing up. And she decided something. No child should ever feel that alone again. So in 2013, she founded the Hae Mill School, a school for mixed-race children in Korea. Children who might otherwise grow up feeling exactly how she once felt. Think about how powerful that is. She took the pain the world gave her and turned it into protection for someone else. That is legacy. And years later, the South Korean government appointed her to help support multicultural youth and families across the country. The same country that once treated her like she did not belong was now asking her to help shape its future. That is one of the most incredible full-circle moments you will ever hear. The world told Insooni who she was supposed to be. She refused to accept it and rewrote the story herself. From rejection to legacy. From invisible to unforgettable. And maybe that is why her story matters so much. Because somewhere out there right now, someone feels rejected. Someone feels different. Someone feels like the world already made a decision about who they are. But the world was wrong about Insooni. And maybe it is wrong about them too. If this story moved you, share it with somebody. Because stories like this do more than inspire people. Sometimes they save people. And if you want more unforgettable true stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because the next story might change the way you see the world too.